Okay, with Reactive Mongo, there's a really cool thing that we can do, and we can actually open up a cursor and stream data out of Mongo collection based on what's being inserted into it. Now, that does open up a couple challenges. One thing, it doesn't work on all Mongo collections. It has to be a capped collection. So what we're going to do is come in here, back in Robo3T, and I am going to drop this. So actually, let's take a quick look, see how many we did insert. So you can see while I was running, I actually inserted 361 quotes. Now, that did run for a little bit, and remember, we do have a delay in there, and we're not emitting that frequently. We definitely speed this up and get a lot more performance, so this count definitely is not reflective of performance by any means. But let's go ahead and drop this now. So I got to drop this completely and say yes. Now we're going to create a collection. Again, we're going to call it quote, but we want to click on advanced, and we want to create a maximum, let's say 10,000 bytes or 100,000 bytes, and we'll give it a cap of 1,000 documents. So now that is a capped collection. So that's important because this stream does not work without a capped collection. So I've created that. In the next video, we'll go through the configuration for Spring Data MongoDB and how we can get a cursor that's going to tail the inserts on that. Okay, in this part of the course, we are going to look at using MongoDB and the reactive types and the reactive driver of MongoDB. So Spring Data MongoDB does have some very nice support for reactive types. And what we're going to do is show you how to get data in and out of MongoDB reactively. Now, I'm using MongoDB specifically because of its reactive streaming support. At the time of recording this video, the SQL databases do not have it. However, Oracle has indicated that they're going to work on a reactive JDBC driver. And I think the Postgres guys are also working on it. But at this time, Mongo, Redis, I think Cassandra are the databases that do have reactive types. So we're going to be playing with MongoDB to see how we can stream events in and out of MongoDB. So this is going to be a fun section of the course to work on. We'll go through it step by step and show you how to work with MongoDB and get some real hands-on working with reactive streams of events. All right, in this video, we are going to introduce you to MongoDB. MongoDB is a document-oriented database, so this is quite different from traditional SQL databases where everything's laid out in tables. Mongo is going to lay its data out in what's known as documents. Now, the documents are actually stored as BSON, which is binary JSON. So as you work with the database, you'll get things coming out of the database in a JSON format. So you'll be working with a lot of JSON when you're dealing with Mongo. But this is significantly different than the relational model that you may be used to. Now, the word Mongo is derived from humongous, and I know I mispronounced that. I'm not very good at that word, but that is where Mongo comes from. It was developed all in C++. And like I said before, it is a no SQL database, so significantly different than working with traditional SQL databases. MongoDB was developed in 2007 by a company called Tengen. In 2013, Tengen changed their name to MongoDB, Inc. So they originally developed Mongo as a PaaS application, so platform as a service. And then they took it to open source in 2009, and I think they found a lot more success with that business model. A little bit of history about Mongo. Some of the early adopters were SourceForge, Foursquare, and I'm not even sure if Foursquare is still around. They were quite popular at one point, but in the U.S. they seem to have fallen off the face of the earth. I'm not sure if they're still in business, to be honest. Craigslist and eBay. And today, Mongo is used by a lot of large companies, including MetLife, Facebook, Expedia, and Google. And looking at my metrics from springframework.guru, I've got several posts on MongoDB, and those are very popular. And my YouTube channel, I also have some stuff about MongoDB up there and Spring Boot, and that's one of my top videos. So it is something that's gained a lot of popularity in the marketplace, and I see it out there more and more. Now, why would you want to use MongoDB? It's great for high insert systems, like sensor reading, social media systems, or like advertising systems, where you're doing a lot of insert type activity. And also a lot of read activity too. Mongo, you can cluster Mongo servers and distribute their load and create replica servers. So it's very, very scalable. So you can definitely scale up with Mongo quite inexpensively because it will run on minimal hardware, and you can do a lot of instances that will replicate to each other. And it's also nice when you need schema flexibility. So having your data in documents and in a JSON format, it gives you a lot of flexibility to add properties as your requirements change. Now, there's some pitfalls with Mongo. Some people avoid Mongo. It really has no concept of transactions like we saw with traditional relational databases. So we talked about ACID when we talked about MySQL. And that's one of the things that makes Mongo so much faster, is because it's not dealing with all the protections of the ACID transaction. So in MySQL, there's a lot of locking that's happening to make sure that you're not stomping on each other from other sessions or other threads. In Mongo, you don't have that protection. So you can get lost updates inside of Mongo. If you have the risk of updates on the same record, not a good use case for Mongo. And if you watch Josh Long doing presentations, he does like to joke about MongoDB losing data. So I would use Mongo for a lot of things where, like, think about Facebook, where someone is liking a post. If you lose a like, so what? Really, at the end of the day, so what if that like gets lost? But if you're doing a bank, not a good use case. Where if you're dealing with dollars and cents, probably not a good use case where you have weird errors happen with dollar terms. Now, some terminology as we move forward with Mongo compared to traditional relational databases. Both of them are called a database. Inside of a traditional relational database, you have tables, but Mongo calls those collections. A relational database will have rows within the table, where Mongo will have documents inside the collection. Properties are called columns inside database row, where in a document they'll be referred to as fields. Now, one of the powerful features of a relational database is being able to do table joins. You can do something similar with Mongo, and they call that embedded documents. So you get a reference to the document embedded inside another document. Both of them have primary key, and then aggregation is a little bit different. And this is where you're like going and doing a sum operation. So just a terminology difference there, really, but the approaches are fairly similar. My experience with Mongo has been pleasant. It takes a little getting used to working with it directly. From a Spring perspective, when we're using Spring data, as you'll see, it is fairly transparent. Spring data, Mongo does make it very easy for us to work with the Mongo database, and it does have some unique capabilities. A lot of it is going to be in terms of the flexibility of the database schema, where we can add properties without having to manipulate it. So like in a relational database, you have to go and add a column to a table if you want to use that. In Mongo, you don't have any schema to manipulate. You just add that property and start using it. So your database migrations become much simpler, as you'll see going forward in this class. So we're going to have a lot of fun with Mongo. It does support streaming out of the database and non-blocking streaming, more importantly. So we will be using that in the future as we get into reactive programming and non-blocking programming. That's why we're bringing Mongo in the course. But what we're going to do first is convert over our recipe application, because I want you guys to see how easy it is to use Spring Data. And we're going to go from Spring Data JPA to Spring Data Mongo, and we'll have some minor code changes, and we're going to look at that in the next video. All right, in this video, we are going to create the initial project for our Mongo application. So what I'm going to do is come in here in IntelliJ and go to File, New, new project. And again, I'm going to use the Spring initializer to create this project. And let's go in here. And I'm going to call it that. That's going to match the repository I've set up in GitHub for it. And we'll go ahead and use good old Maven here. Maybe we'll use Gradle for the next project. Kind of a long package name there, but I'm going to let that go for now. And here what we want to do is come up here to Spring Boot, and M5 is the latest and greatest stable release that does have the release of Spring Framework in it. And let's see here, we're not going to get into Spring Security just yet, but we do want Project Lombok. And then we want Reactive Web for sure, because we are definitely going to be playing with that. And then come down here to NoSQL, and we want Reactive MongoDB, as well as embedded MongoDB. We'll be utilizing that for any testing that we need to do. And just double checking, that's all we need at this point in time. The regular MongoDB, that does not include the reactive driver for MongoDB, but this option does include the reactive driver. So that's everything that we are going to need. So I'm going to go ahead and say next. And here I want to come in and change that directory to the Mongo reactive stock quote service. And this is going to be what I check into GitHub for you guys. We'll go ahead and finish that. And again, I'm using IntelliJ. This is an IntelliJ Ultimate feature. It's not included in the Community Edition. If you are using a different IDE, you can do exactly what I just did by going to start.spring.io and utilizing the web interface, and that will allow you to select these options and pull down a project that has been configured like this. So everything that you're seeing here, minus idea directory, would be downloaded in a zip file for your use. So real handy way to start projects. And just to take a look at what we brought in. So we're bringing in the Spring Boot starter for MongoDB Reactive, Spring Boot starter Webflux. So that's going to bring in the Webflux client, all the reactive goodness. Then of course Project Lombok, Spring Boot starter test. And here's the embedded, and you can see here this is putting in a test scope. And that's important because when we run in production or in any other mode other than test, this will not be on the class path. So when this is on the class path, Spring Boot will auto-configure an embedded Mongo instance. When it is not on the class path, it's going to be configuring regular Mongo for us. And we'll be looking for a local Mongo instance to be running on the local system. And that's the default behavior of Spring Boot. Now, one other thing I want to point out to you is because we are using Project Lombok, if you are not familiar with it, you want to come over here to your settings for your compiler settings in your IDE. And I'm not quite sure if you can do this. I'm assuming that you can do this with Eclipse if you happen to be using Eclipse. But make sure that you're enabling annotation processing. And Project Lombok is going in, it's putting a hook into the Java compile process through annotation. So we want to make sure that is turned on in the IDE. If you do not turn that on, that may cause you a problem. Sometimes you can get away with it, but if you do run into problems, this is where the Project Lombok created methods are not being detected. You want to make sure that you do have that enabled and then say OK. So I'm going to take this project, get it checked into GitHub, and then we are going to go ahead and start building our MongoDB project. Okay, in this video, we're going to look at setting up the data model for our little quote service here. So I'm going to come in and set that up now. Let's create a new package. I'm just going to call it domain and create a new class called quote. Go ahead and add him to Git. Now, I'm cheating a little bit here. I do have a scratch pad here where I have some code written on it. So this is setting that up now. I'm not going to get too in-depth on Spring Data for MongoDB here, but to set this up, what we want to do is indicate that it is a MongoDB document. And I'm going to use Project Lombok annotation for data, which is going to give me getters, setters, toString method, and whatnot. And then come in here and we will add this as an ID property. So that configures our quote class. So this is now basically a MongoDB document that can be managed by Spring Data MongoDB. You can see how this has been created in here. Now let's go ahead and create a new package for repositories. And we'll create a class called quote repository. And that should actually be an interface. Now we want this to extend the reactive Mongo repository. You can see there it takes generics for the type and the ID value. So you can see here, not sure why that's thinking it's an unused import. I had a mistake there. That's why IntelliJ wasn't happy. Now it's going to ask me to bring it back in. So my little mistake there. So this is going to be a Spring Data repository. We're extending out the reactive Mongo repository. Let's take a quick look, see what that is doing for us. So this is the reactive repository. So this gives us these functions here. So we have insert and find all, and this is going to be implemented by MongoDB or by Spring Data MongoDB for us at runtime. So this extends out also a flex for find all, and we can do a sort here for a variable. So that's a nice feature. And let's take a look back to this. And then we also get the reactive query by example executor. So we do have these other functions that are going to be implemented just by implementing that interface. So we'll get these methods here. Let's go ahead and download the sources here. So that's a nice feature. So we can see the additional data that we get here. So there's a lot of capabilities within Spring Data MongoDB. We're going to be just scratching the surface of them in the course, but this repository is going to give us all the functionality that we need to both get data into MongoDB and get data back from MongoDB in a reactive fashion. So this makes it like crazy easy to work with MongoDB. Okay, in this video we are going to look at setting up a WebFlux client. So I'm going to come in here, create a new package, and call that client. And we'll create a new class called WebFlux client. No, actually, let's make it stock quote client. A little more descriptive there. So we'll call him stock quote client, and I'm going to show you some configuration here. So I'm going to give him three properties, and what I want to do, I'm going to copy this over, show you a little Spring Sugar here. So I'm going to set up guru.host port and path. So I want to dynamically create that. So the thought is, if I ever move this application off localhost to something else, that I could do that, and then I can just override these properties when I need to. So I'm externalizing those properties, taking the opportunity to show you a little trick here with the Spring Framework. Now I'm going to mark this as a Spring component, and then I'm going to do configuration properties and give it a prefix of guru. And the way Spring is going to work is going to look for properties that begin with guru and then match this property name. Now, I haven't done anything here as far as setting these getters and setters, but what I can do is add in setter through Project Lombok, and that gives me setters for all these. So my class is just going to have setters for these properties, and I can use the Spring Framework and the Spring context to get this wired up. Now, I want this guy to return back flux of quotes. Let's call this get quote stream. And what I want him to do is return back a new web client. So this is out of Spring Framework 5. I'm going to get a builder, and we'll go through a functional pattern here, and we'll say base URL, and let's go ahead and declare that. We're going to build that URL. And also, just for our purposes, let's do another project Lombok. That's going to give us a handle on the logger. And just for debug purposes, let's go in and do log.debug URL. Did that backwards. So we're going to set the base URL to the URL string that we just set up there. And say build now. And we want to do a get action from the URI, and then we're going to pass in the path here. We want the media type, actually stream, a JSON stream. So we're going to ask that. That's going to work with the service that we built in the last section of the course. Now we want to say retrieve, body to flux. And you can see that that's all we have to do there. That is going to set up our web client. So it's going to create a web client. It's going to go to that base URL. Then we do the build function. We're saying do a get action, the HTTP get. That's what line 34 is doing. And we're setting the path to the path there that we're specifying in the properties. So I'll just show you that in the properties. See, it's going to go to /quotes. And then we're going to accept the media type of application stream JSON. So we're going to get a stream of quotes from our service. Then we're going to say retrieve and body to flux. So this is going to get a flux operation from that streaming source. So this client is just going to stream forever until we tell it to stop. So in the next video, we're going to start looking at working with it. So we got some fun stuff coming up here, but this is going to give us the base web client to get the streams of our stock quote stream. All right, as you know, by default, Spring Boot is going to be running on port 8080. And what we want to do just for our local development, we want to run this application, our MongoDB application, on 8080, but we want to run our quote service on 8081. And we can easily do that if we come into application.properties. We set the server port to 8081. That is the property that tells Spring Boot to configure Tomcat to listen on 8081. And when we run our application, we can actually come in here and just run that service. This is going to start up our quote service. And what we want to do is get this running on 8081 like that. So when we run our web client, we can tell him to go to 8081, and let's double check our application.properties. And I did set that to 8081, so that's going to work on localhost 8081, and it will go to this server here. So I want to set that up and get this cooking in case you didn't know how to do that. And we'll get this running so that the two of these will talk to each other seamlessly. If you ever see, if I did not have that, this sometimes trips up people. So let me comment that out, show you something here. I'm going to restart that. You can see he's up and running. And some people new to the Spring Framework, if they try to run something here, I'm going to run this application, and we'll see that he gets a port conflict. So you can see that this is already in use, and some people new to development get tripped up by that, but you can only have a single process running on a port, so that's why we're doing this mapping here. So we will run this guy on 8081, and then this will start up normally. So coming up in the course, we are going to be working with these two here. Oh, still not dead. You are in 8081. Stop you. Restart. I don't have MongoDB running yet, so that will also be showing in an upcoming video. So in the next video, I'm going to show you how to set up MongoDB, and then this client will be running happily. All right, in this video, we're going to talk about running MongoDB. So there's several different ways to run it. You can see here, because I have Mongo on the class path, Spring Boot is automatically auto-configured a Mongo client, and it's looking to connect to localhost on port 27017. So that's the default installation location for Mongo. At this point, I'd like you to, if you do not have MongoDB installed somehow, go ahead and get it installed and running, or run it inside of a Docker container. I'm going to demonstrate how to run it from Docker. The MongoDB is available for all the popular operating systems. I'm running OS X. I could install it locally, natively under OS X if I wanted to. I'm going to choose to run it under Docker, and I'm going to show you how to do that here for OS X. Now, if you're not familiar with Docker, I highly recommend checking out my Docker for Java developers. I get into Docker in depth on that course. I really enjoy developing with Docker, and I'm going to show you just how easy it is here. I'm going to jump over to the terminal, and I already have the command ready. I have Docker installed already, and I'm going to do Docker run, and -p is going to map 27017, the port 27017, to my local host of port 27017. So I could do some type of port mapping there if I wanted to, but I want that default port exposed to the host system. So that's going to work. And then the last part, the -d, is to say run in the background, and then Mongo is the image name. Now if I come over here, got it up in Chrome, and this is the Docker Hub page. You can see that there's a number of different versions of Docker. When I don't specify any tag there, I'm going to get the latest image. So I'm going to get this image here, and that's going to get brought down. Now, if you are not familiar with Docker, don't worry about that. The requirement to move forward in the course is get MongoDB installed and running. So I'm going to show you how to do that with Docker at this point. You can see there echoed back this long string. And if I do a Docker PS to see the running services, if you notice the string here, the container ID, that's actually corresponds to this long hash code here. And you can see that it is running. And what's important here is that localhost is mapped to 27017. And we got a Reverend Wright. That's an interesting name. When you don't specify a name under Docker, it kind of comes up with one by default for you. So kind of interesting there. Some of the interesting names that Docker does come up with. Some of them are funny. Now let's go over to IntelliJ. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this. You can see that we started up and we connected to Docker. Okay. Do I still have them? Yes, there we are. Robo3T. This is also a MongoDB client that is available. I'm going to say go ahead and connect. So we can see that it has connected to localhost. And right now we don't have any collections, I don't think. So no collections here, no users, no functions. So really just an empty Mongo database that we connected to. Robo3T is also available for a number of different operating systems. This is my favorite Mongo client, so we'll be utilizing this to inspect data inserted into MongoDB. This is another nice tool that there are versions available for Windows, Linux, and OS X. So good tool. If you have a different MongoDB client, please feel free to use it. And that's just my preference. So in the next video, we are going to look at getting some data into MongoDB. So just to recap, at this point, we can bring up our service running on 8080, and I already have the stock quote service running on 8081. And what we're getting ready to do is to stream stock quotes out of our stock quote service into our application running on 8080, and we are going to take those stock quotes and persist them into MongoDB. Okay, what we want to do is start exercising this web client. So I am going to just do a little demonstration here, and I'm going to call this quote runner. We'll go ahead and add this. So we're going to make this a Spring component. And now we want to implement a class. We want to say implement, or I should say an interface. We want to implement an interface. That would be the proper terminology. And I'm going to implement command line runner. Now this is a special Spring Boot class. It's specific to Spring Boot. And I got to implement the methods. So we'll go ahead and implement the run. And what happens is this is going to run on startup. So Spring Boot, when it starts up, when it brings up the Spring context, it's going to look for any components that, or Spring Beans, I should say, that implement the command line runner. Now let's go ahead and we'll wire in client, call it stock quote client. Now it's complaining because I made it final. Now if I add in the constructor, and again, we don't need to add AutoWire for that because that's going to happen automatically because this is a Spring managed component, and Spring knows that it demands a stock quote client, so it can use reflection to see what it demands and wire in that bean for us. Now what we want to do is get a flux of quotes, right? And we'll import that. Quote flux, call him that. And we want to get a quote stream from him. Now, this isn't going to do anything. We're just going to get a handle on the object, so nothing's going to happen at that point. Remember, it's a reactive type. So until we go in and say quote flux dot subscribe, now we're going to ask it for a subscriber. And what we can do is just do a system out. So a simple system print line. And just as a reminder, what's happening here is we have our client running, and that's actually in this window right here. So we have the stock quote service running, and he's up on 8081. And we've configured our application to point our stock quote client to point to 8081, and we are running on 8080. Now I'm going to restart this, and what's going to happen is that this command line runner is going to get started up on initiation of Spring. So I'm going to go ahead and restart Spring at this point. And now it's going to get brought that up, and we ran into an error, unknown host, local host exception. So ran into a problem there. And that is my bad on this. So that should be like so. Now, I bet that's going to work a lot better now that we have the URL correct. And right away, you can see on the bottom of the screen, we are streaming stocks, and it's just going right ahead and giving us all the stocks that we want. And now we can see that our command quote runner is dutifully going, and this is going to run forever and ever and ever. So our background process, he's in there, he's making up random quotes for us at random, and our client is asking for them, and it's just going to keep going like this. Now I set this up just as a demonstration. I'm going to check it in, and when I check it in, I'm going to comment out the component like so. So if you want to check this out, so I'm going to go ahead and restart it. So I just set up the command line runner, A, to show you the command line runner, and B, how we can get a continuous stream. So now I restarted. You can see that the quote runner wasn't initialized because it was not brought into the Spring context, and we are not streaming quotes anymore. Now in the next video, we're going to have some fun and start taking these quotes and putting them into MongoDB. All right, in this video, what we want to do is create a service, and what we want to do is take quotes and persist them into MongoDB. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a new package here just out of habit and call it service. And let's create a new class, and we will call him about quote monitor service. So quote monitor service. And we'll go ahead and use the stereotype of service. And that will create this into the Spring context as a Spring bean. Now we need two things on this one. We want to get the client, stock quote client, and also we want to get the whole of the repository because we're going to use the repository to store it. So there's a quote repository. I'll go ahead and add these in on the constructor. Now, I'm going to show you a different technique to have this run on startup. And we are going to listen to Spring events. So the application listener is what we want. And in this case, we want the context refreshed event. So what's going to happen is this is the Spring way. So I showed you the command line runner. That's specific to Spring Boot. This is just pure Spring. So if we're running without Spring Boot, this is the old school way of tapping into startup events. And the application context That event is thrown by Spring. When Spring is all started up, it's completely done with the bean life cycle. It's like that event gets triggered by Spring or thrown out when the context is completely up and ready. So that's like, hello, I'm ready. Let's start doing stuff event. So we do need to implement something. So let's go ahead and implement the methods. So that's an on application event. We don't need to do anything with the event. We just want to tap into that. So now we can say the stock quote client, and we are going to get the quote stream. And let me show you the log function. And let's call this quote. Usually use the class name, but I just want to do this for demonstration purposes. So we'll be able to see some log chatter as this processes events. Now what we want to do is pass in a little lambda here. So we'll send in the quote. And what we can do is mono. So what that's going to do is take in the quote from the stream. So we'll get a quote object there from the stream. And then we're going to call the quote repository and save that. Now that saved quote is going to be returned back as a mono from Spring Data MongoDB. And let's just do a system out there. And what I want to do is see the ID out of that. So we're going to block on the mono and get the ID. And let's put a little prefix in here. So we're going to do I saved a quote and then output the ID value there. So because that ID is going to be null from our service, we're not setting an ID there, but we will get an ID property back from MongoDB. So just to recap what's going on here. So we have a service class, and so Spring will auto wire this up, and we're saying we're going to implement the application listener. So when the context is all ready, this is going to get kicked in. So it works a lot like command line runner, but here we are going to go ahead, run on startup. So let's go ahead, and I was already running here. So let's go ahead and restart this. So we can see that Spring Boot died and now it's restarting. And right away we can see that we're streaming quotes. And notice that I saved an ID and we're getting an ID value. Let's bounce over here to Robo3T, and we'll have to do a little refresh here. Now we can see the quote, and there's a bunch of documents in there. So let's see if we do a refresh here. So we can see that this is going in and populating. Things are happening. And now this process is going to continue on forever. It's just going to go and go and go and go until I stop it. And it's persisting data into MongoDB. Okay, so what we want to do is implement a tailable cursor. And basically this is going to open up a connection to MongoDB, and we're going to watch that collection for every time a document is inserted. We're going to receive a copy of that. So this is a new feature, and it's specific to Reactive MongoDB, and Spring Data MongoDB does have support for it. So the way we implement it, we have to implement a flux, but we don't want to do this. We want to use @tailable. And instead of that, we want to say find I'm not 100% sure if you need this naming convention or not. I couldn't find the specific documentation on that, so I might be wrong on that. Not sure what the squiggly is. Sure that's... Oh, that's what I missed. Accidentally deleted that. So, okay, so now we have this implemented, and what we want to do is get a handle on that, and I'm going to modify our little runner class, our quote runner, and what we can do is come in and say private, and we'll just get a handle on the repository. And instead of this, what we want to do is get a hold of the quote stream from the repository. So now we're going to take that flux, and let's make this a little bit more interesting for our viewing pleasure. We'll take in a quote. We're going to put a long tail there just so it stands out in the logs a little bit. So we'll output the ID there. So now let's go ahead and run this. Oh, forgot one thing. I commented out the component. So now I'm going to bring back in that component. That was my mistake there. So without that component, this does not run. So let's go ahead and start up Spring Boot now. Yeah, I can see that we are off to the races. And one thing I want to note, the first time I did this without any data in Mongo, this did not execute. It fell right through. Now, technically, the subscribe calls a disposable. So what we want to do is so we got to make sure that we do close down that. So if this ever falls out for one reason, causes an error, this resource would still be open. So that dispose method is something important to call. So when running like this, you are responsible to close down that connection, just like closing down like a database connection or something like that. So you can see this is going to run forever and ever and ever. So just to recap what is going on here, in case there's any doubts. So we have our quote service here running on 8081. And this guy is creating our quotes, and it is streaming through this. Our quote monitor service has got a handle on the web client. So our stock client has got a handle talking on 8081, getting a stream of quotes from that, and it is persisting into MongoDB. Now we started up a quote runner that now he has an open cursor to MongoDB, and he's listening for events of insert actions on Mongo. So whenever Mongo inserts a record into that collection, it emits an event, goes down the pipe, and he gets it. And we can come over here to Robo23 and do a refresh on this. And we can see that the count is going up and up and up. So neat little application of reactive streams. I hope you enjoyed this. I had fun putting it together. So just sitting here watching stuff stream. So things are making a round trip in a rather interesting way. And this will go on forever and ever and ever until my computer loses power or I go over here and click on stop. Okay, I want to show you something here. And I'm not quite sure why this is happening, but if it happened to me, it's probably going to happen to you because I was playing with this a little bit further, doing some testing because I thought it was pretty cool. And you can see here, I added in a bunch of log output, and right now I am not getting my log messages from the tailable cursor, and I am honestly not sure why on that. Something I'm going to investigate a little bit further. If I do find a solution, I will tell you what I fixed and how I resolved it. I suspect it's something to do with the newness of the tailable cursor and the reactive framework here. But what's interesting here is I did come over here to T3, and I think I'm up pretty close to the max size here. So that might be the problem. I'm not quite sure if I didn't set a big enough max size on it, but that shouldn't be an issue, you wouldn't think. Take another look here. So I am getting, it looks like I'm capped out on the number of records inserted, but I'm not quite sure why that stopped the cursor from working, because it did get here, and for some reason the cursor seems to be open but not working. And something I'm going to research a little bit further, see if I can find a solution. But if it happened to me, it could happen to you as well. It was working. You saw it there before, and all I did is stop and restart, and now it is not working. So I'm going to play around with this and do a little research, see if I can find out why. But right now, I honestly don't know why that tailable cursor is not working.